piano concerto. So, I joined Hi-Fi News magazine 40 years ago last month. Before that, when I was young, trained in the sciences, got my bachelor's degree, went to work at a laboratory doing research. And then a friend of mine, a drummer who I played with in bands, called me in July '72 and said, "Do you want to go on the road with this band with me?" And I said, "Yes, please." Threw away my scientific career and for the next 4.5 years worked as a musician, making recordings, touring, and learning how recordings are made from the inside as a session musician. So, first track I'll play you. This is what I was doing 40 years ago. This is a track from an album which came out on RCA in '77, and it's a disco arrangement of Cole Porter's Night and Day. I'm playing bass guitar, I did the arrangement, and I'm one of the backing voices. So this is what I was doing before I got a day job on a magazine. What it would be.
Like the beep, 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 dum, 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 when the jungle shadows fall. Like the tick, tick, tock of the stately clock as it stands against the wall. Like the drip, drip, drip of the raindrops when the summer showers through. So a voice within me keeps repeating, you.
So, you'll be astonished to learn that that was not a hit, even though it was disco and that was what was happening at the time. So, I ended up on magazines, applied for a job at Hi-Fi News as an editorial assistant and got it, and became editor in 1982 and then moved to this country to edit Stereophile 4 years later. And so, go back to what I was saying, pressure waves, and yet you think you hear something, you think you hear an orchestra, or in this case you hear bass guitar and drums and an early string synth and overdubbed guitars and overdubbed voices. So this is a miracle that this happens, and it's something that people don't realize just how odd it is that we can hear things. So I have with me my trusty cowbell. Things always get better with more cowbell. So if I hit the cowbell, you know unambiguously where it is, where the sound is coming from. Yet, how do you do that? Well, you have two ears, and your brain interprets the sound waves in this way. If the sound is over here, it's louder in this ear than this ear. So the brain goes, it's louder in this ear, it's got to be over there. And that works at high frequencies. It's over to that side. The sound from that reaches this ear before it reaches this ear. It's about 7 milliseconds time difference. And at low frequencies, the brain goes, sound reaches this ear before that ear, it must be over there. And this works for all sound directions. One exception. There's something called medial plane confusion. If I hit the cowbell directly in front of me, it's there. If I hit it behind me, it's actually very difficult to hear that it's behind rather than in front. And your brain goes, it's reaching both ears simultaneously, it's equally loud in both ears, it's probably in front of me. But it's not. In that case, it was behind me. So, real sounds, your brain is using amplitude information, time information to determine the directions of sounds. There's one area of confusion between 800 hertz and 2 kilohertz. It's very hard to hear where sounds come from because you're transitioning from amplitude information at high frequencies to time information at low frequencies, and it's difficult. And things like birds issue alarm calls which are centered in that frequency region because predators actually don't. Where's that sound coming from? So let's record the cowbell. If I play it in the left channel, if I play it, come on. Exactly the same situation as the live cowbell. Similarly, if I play it in the right channel. Your brain is working and saying, yep, cowbell over there or cowbell over there, just as it would with the real cowbell. But if I play it in both channels simultaneously, and you're sitting on the center line between the speakers, something strange happens. Now, there's a phantom cowbell here. How does that happen? Well, the brain is using the amplitude information. It's saying, sound equally loud reaching both my ears, there must be a cowbell in front of me. That phantom image is extremely difficult. It's a miracle that it happens, because it's now, there is no cowbell in the center, it's an illusion. And your brain is constructing an internal model to say, okay, that must be what happened. And there's no time information. Sound reaches your ears simultaneously. So this is called amplitude stereo, the use of amplitude ratios between two pairs of loudspeakers to create a continuum of points on that between them. And if I map the soundstage with just using different loudnesses, you can hear the cowbell slowly move across the soundstage as it becomes louder in this channel than that channel. But it's an illusion. Your brain is working hard to construct, well, that must be what happened. And if you remember with a real cowbell, you can use time information at lower frequencies between the sounds reaching the two ears to determine direction. The next track I'll play is the same cowbell. Now it's equally loud in both channels, but it's not a phantom center image in the center. What I did was the sound, it's equally loud in both channels, but it comes from this speaker before it comes from that speaker. And then I gradually pull this channel back in time and this one forward in time. So what you should hear is a stereo image but created with pure time information. Oh, stupid thing. Hold on. The computer doesn't want to play with me tonight. Come on. Here we go. So you should hear the same thing. Cowbell moving across the stage. Except if you listen carefully, it moved a lot quicker than with the amplitude stereo, and in the middle it kind of rushed across. Because your brain is not used to just hearing time information, it's used to hearing amplitude information also. I'll play you a recording I made using a time stereo image, just like that. The sound, this is a piano, and it's a piece by Schubert that I recorded 20 or so years ago. And it's a time stereo recording. It will be. Oh, come on. The computer doesn't want to play with me tonight. Here we go. sounds fine, stereo image of a piano, but I'm going to do something at the 1 minute mark, which you know from your own systems is catastrophic. I'm going to invert the polarity of one of the speakers, except I do it with the recording. Now with amplitude stereo, you know that if you listen with your speakers out of phase, it goes woozy and phasey and the bass disappears. But if you listen at the 1 minute mark on this recording, when I do this catastrophic thing, well, you won't hear any change. At this point I flip the polarity on one channel. Really interesting that with a time stereo image like that, it's a whole different animal to a normal amplitude stereo recording of the type that 99.99% of recordings are made. Now, this recording came up by accident. I was recording with Robert Harley, who's now editor of another magazine I can't remember the name of. He used to work for me, and we were recording Robert Silverman, the pianist, in this church in Albuquerque. And he had set up a pair of stereo mics to record make a normal amplitude stereo recording. And I had set up a pair of spaced omni mics just for fun. And I was recording that in parallel on a Revox PR99 recorder. So, concert is a great success, other than a woman who sat underneath Bob's mic crunkling a candy wrapper. Anyway, we listened to a recording the next day, and I said, Bob, did you listen to this when you got home? He said, no, but I mean, I'm sure it's okay. I said, no, it's mono. He said, oh. And we listened, yes, it's mono. What happened? And it turned out that the microphones we were using had failed, and instead of recording crossed figure 8 mics, which gives you pure amplitude stereo, we had recorded dual mono, which is the most useless way of recording anything. So I had the Spaced Omnis set up, so we released the CD from the Spaced Omnis because everybody we played it, that piano recording to, liked it. They said, well, there's a lovely sense of bloom, you know, and stereo's a bit kind of woozy, but oh, it sounds like a real piano in a real hall. And that set me thinking, because up to that point, I'd been a real amplitude stereo purist. And, well, surely if you're going to make recordings, the goal is to have people buy the CDs, right? So, if people like the sound of something which I had thought was wrong, I must have been wrong to think it was wrong. So, at that point, I thought, okay, I'm going to record now so that I not only capture amplitude stereo, but also time stereo. And I've been doing that for the last 20 years. It takes some work in post-production to make it work, but I'll play you an example. This is the male voice choir cantus that I recorded in 2007. And I recorded with what's called an ORTF pair of cardioids, which is directional mics at an angle of like 130 degrees. Gives you really good amplitude stereo, but you don't get a lot of bass because cardioid mics roll off in the bass. And this is what you get. This is the cardioid mics on a piece by the Chicago composer Nora Bosch.
I have been promises, I have been to China, I am a quiet person, I like to work because I have made mistakes.
So, it's very clean. There's a really nice definition of the singers across the stage, but it's a bit dry, and there's no real low frequencies, and there's none of that bloom I like. So At the same time, I recorded exactly the same performance where a pair of Omni microphones spaced. And Omnis are flat to DC, they give you a lot of bass, and because it's spaced Omnis, it's a time stereo recording, and this is the sound of that.
I have been promises, I have been to China, I have a quiet beside, I like to close.
So that's has the bloom and the low frequencies, but the stereo is very hazy, sort of woozy in the center, and that on its own isn't good enough to release. I also recorded with a third pair of Omnis further back to get more reverb.
I have been promises, I have been to China, I have a quiet rest.
That's way too bar for me to be released. But in post-production, I now have 3 very different recordings that I'm going to attempt to mix in the right ratio of loudnesses and in their time alignment to get my impression of the engineer of what the audience would have heard at exactly the best seat in the hall. And the point is, all recordings are made by engineers and producers who are not capturing a documentary. You just heard 3 documentary recordings. None of them could be released because they all have problems. But by using artifice in the service of art, the engineer, producer can give you something which is their impression of what it would have sounded like. But it's not. It's not accurate. It's a creation, a recreation. So this is the actual mix that I ended up with, which came out on the CD. And this is a work called The Turning. It's really interesting. The composer, Maura Bosch, she sent a questionnaire to men in prison, men who'd been convicted of abusing their wives, in some cases murdering their wives. And the lyric is the answers from that questionnaire, from all these men. Will be, come on.
I have been promises, I have been to China, I am a quiet beside, I like to work outdoors, I have made mistakes, some things you don't know about me, I believe in myself, I believe in change. Some
making this glorious music with a chiming sixths in the bass, and the lyric, which is, I am a quiet person, I believe in equal, and yet the men who wrote those were all abusers. Anyway, I recorded that in this glorious hall in Goshen, Indiana. It's like a third scale model of Carnegie Hall, and it has adjustable acoustics, so you can set the reverb time to reinforce the music. The next example I'll play you is when it all went wrong. So the band, the choir cantos, had an arrangement of Deck the Halls, and they really wanted to use drums on this. And I said, you can't use drums in this hall, the reverb's too long. The drummer will have to be like ticking, just not to overload the hall, and at the same time, because it's so reverberant, he's going to play slowly, because otherwise the reverb will build up and it'll become a mess. No, let's do it. All right, so this is a file, it's all one file. So it starts off with the choir and drums in that same hall with my best attempt at miking them.